Hi, welcome to the Mindset. This is our second episode of our podcast. I'm Christopher Feltner, training performance architect with Ukeru, as well as Grafton Integrated Health Network. And with me,
Hi, I'm Kim Sanders. I'm one of the executive vice presidents here at Grafton, as well as the president of Ukeru.
all right. So last time we talked about life during COVID, in our field, the world itself. This episode, we're going to get into a little bit of what we teach about comfort versus control, but particularly mistaking kindness for weakness. Do you have to be hard? Do you have to be tough in this field with kids, with people, and kind of looking at it from different angles with it? So I guess to start, Kim, in case we have someone watching who isn't very familiar with comfort versus control, how would you explain that to the everyday person?
I think the easiest way to think about comfort versus control is to first think about that all of us have bad days, that all of us have tough times, um, things that we may see as challenging, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and that we need to look into ourselves and to what we need when we're experiencing that kind of situation. And so if you ask, like if you went downtown on the street, Christopher, and you ask people, you would probably hear people say that they need like love, support, compassion, someone to listen. Um, and so for me, comfort versus control really is taking that then into our field, and that if our staff are having a struggle, if the clients that we're working with are struggling, they need the same thing. So it means basically when someone's having a super tough time and they're sort of at their worst, we need to be at our best. And we need to be kind, compassionate, comforting, and, loving to each other to help people through.
Well, I think that's interesting because obviously, I've heard you say this probably hundreds of times by now in training, as well as when we teach it. But a lot of people struggle with that idea of kindness or just a word comfort and
Comfort.
comfort versus control. One of our trainers, Patrick, did a training one time where he was just giving an introduction talking about comfort versus control, and he hadn't even gotten to the point of explaining it yet. It just said on the screen comfort versus control. We had someone in a class who went on a 15-minute tangent, talk about how you can't be, soft with these kids. They need consequences. They need to learn that they can't do this. And then after 15 minutes, he would paused, and Patrick went, "So you've been talking for 15 minutes, and I haven't even told you what this is yet." Right?
Exactly.
So, what do you think it is that makes people a lot of times so uncomfortable with the idea of kindness or being comforting when we're talking about the field that we work in?
Yeah. Well, I think that so often what comes into that are the biases that we bring to start. So it's how we've all been raised. Were you raised with parents that maybe had a heavier hand? Were you raised by parents who maybe wanted you to sort of silence your emotions a little bit? How many times have we heard stories, especially about little boys who are told that you boys don't cry, or so I think that that can be based on, again, our upbringing, the culture we come from. Many cultures have different views on this, and I think that when you come into work in this field, you bring that with you. We often talk about, you can't tell people that if they've done that their entire life, like leave that in the parking lot. And it takes time. It takes time to sort of rewire our own brains around that.
Well, I think you bring up a good point because really the whole idea of that a lot of times it does come from how we were brought up. You
Mhm.
know, being brought up myself, I can remember, my parents were always gave me what I needed, were always there for me. But, if I had any kind of negative feelings or anything, you're kind of raised that well, you keep that to yourself. If you don't have anything nice to
Right.
say and all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But so, how do we get past that? How do we get past the point of how I was raised or how I raised my kids to how I serve those with intellectual disabilities, autism, behavioral problems, things of that nature?
Well, I just think that we have to really look at it like you would any career. So, if you became a truck driver and you've never driven an 18 wheeler, all you're used to driving is a little car, and you zip around, and all of a sudden you're put in a big truck and you can't do that anymore. Over time, it's the experience, it's the training, and I think it's really no different. I mean, and I think there's also, I don't know if you would call it professionalism, but there's also this idea that I think some people struggle with, is that when you join an organization, regardless if it's Grafton, Amazon, Procter and Gamble, wherever you go, there are organizational foundations and standards, and that wherever you go, you, because you are, I mean, technically you are the employee, you have to adapt. So you have to make decisions around, is this an organization I feel good about, I can stand behind, can I get on board with this? So I mean, I think that's part of it, but then I do think the organization has a responsibility to provide excellent training, excellent coaching, and experiences. And I do think that for, even for employees, that if, if an employee comes in and they're struggling, just like we would with the clients that we work with, we always tell people that we got to understand why they're struggling and then help them be successful. And I think it's the same way with the staff and employees of an organization. I mean, I think it's 2020. Things have changed. This is not 1950 anymore. That, I think that organizations hopefully are seeing that you got to work with people. You got to find out why they're struggling and help them, versus, just fire people. That's not the way of our world anymore.
Right.
It's just not.
So, I mean, a lot of times people, when we go train people as well as when we train our own staff that come in, we'll go through the concepts, the teachings, trauma informed care, comfort versus control. And people have great discussions, they show a clear understanding of it. But then sometimes you see people do the opposite
Yep.
when things get tough.
Yep.
So, I mean, what would be some ways that we could get folks to the point where I'm able to be comforting even in harsher circumstances, when someone's yelling, when someone's cursing at me, someone's throwing things, being aggressive, because that's not the way our society is, right?
Right.
You do the crime, you pay the time, all right?
Right. And we see how good that works.
Exactly.
Right. Our
Right.
prisons are overflowing. There's very little rehabilitation happening. Yeah, and I think that if you ask most people, and we're not talking about like super, super violent crimes where people are scared um,
Right.
for their life. But I think in general, people would say that, our system is broke. Um, but I do think that it's normal to go back to what feels natural. And I think the only way that you get around that is, again, by repetition. To me, it's no different than shooting foul shots, or, anything, tying your shoes or writing cursive. The way you get better and better and better at something is by doing it over and over and over. And, and by comfort versus control, and it's sort of silly to even have to say, but being kind, when you're faced with people who are maybe being aggressive, people who are being what we would most of us would say would be disrespectful, you have to be able to experience the impact you can have by being able to control yourself and being kind, and then seeing other people do it. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
important. You got to see your leaders doing it, not just your leaders talking about it, but you need to be able to just, and that is what can spread like a positive virus. Like, and that's what will get people talking. That'll get people in the break room. saying like, "Oh my gosh, did you see Christopher down the hall? How he just talked with Johnny?" I mean, typically Johnny gets restrained or Johnny gets secluded or Johnny gets kicked out of school or what. Did you see how he was able to just calm him down by talking to him? Like when people start seeing that and seeing that it works, then that's when it really takes hold.
Well, I think you just hit on something that really doesn't give is given as much credence as it should is staff peer pressure, right?
Mhm.
Because I mean, I could come in as a person serving others and feel like, this is my approach. I'm going to do it. But then if I'm surrounded by other folks who are discouraging me, right? Like, oh, you need to be tougher with them, or if they'll walk all over you if you're too nice, you need to stop smiling, all that stuff. I mean, that's a lot to combat, especially if it ends up being veteran staff and you're new, or it's your supervisor or
Mhm.
whoever it may be. I mean, how do you stand up against the tidal wave of peer pressure that occurs in places sometimes?
Well, I mean, I think it's one thing to talk about, if I'm an employee and I got coworkers. I mean, all I could say is you gotta, if you truly believe in your heart and you're passionate that you're doing the right thing, then you got to keep trying to do it. But
Right.
sometimes, to me, what's even more harmful is when you have an employee who's trying to do the right thing, trying to do what they were trained to do, but you have someone in a position that's maybe in a, higher than them that's telling them different, or maybe not telling them, but in front of them acting in a way that's sort of contrary to comfort versus control. To me,
Right.
that's the most dangerous, because then all of the momentum that an organization starts to gain can just be flattened in a second if you see a person in an authoritative role, or in a higher level role that's acting the opposite. So I mean, it really is about walking the talk, being a good role model, um, giving making yourself as a good example for people. I mean, Christopher, think about the times that we have been to places in the beginning when we're
Hmm.
starting this journey with them, and we have seen people in leadership type positions who have lost their cool, maybe right even in front of us, or have walked by when they know that we know that they have seen a staff person that's doing something that's contrary to comfort versus control. I mean, that's what's damaging.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I was thinking, obviously we are big promoters of you do the right thing because it's the right thing, you know, and regardless what those around you are trying to say, be the influence for those who are taking an inappropriate approach. But in some ways, that's really tough because it's
Yeah,
almost counteractive to how our brains work, right?
absolutely.
We encounter a negative stimulus, so we avoid it. It's like touching a hot stove, but it's the social version.
Mhm.
So my coworkers start talking bad about me, or don't want to work with me or support me because I'm not falling in line with the stringent methods that they are. That's a tough thing. That's a tough thing.
Oh, it's very tough. It's very tough, and I even would say that it's equally as tough if you are a manager. If
Yep.
I'm a supervisor or a manager and I'm trying to do the right thing, but maybe I have one or two employees who aren't.
Right.
And I think, again, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about the biases that we bring,
Yep.
especially probably folks your and I's age for sure, although you're way younger than me, but our our age, and even the biases we bring to work around what makes a good manager.
Yeah.
And I said a little bit ago, it's 2020, it's not 1950. But I mean, I think that if we think back of stories from our parents and how we were raised to think what it's going to be like, if you're a good supervisor, if you're a
Right.
good manager, it was that too, was to be tough, um, make sure your employees stay in line, um, that you don't take stuff from employees that, hey, you don't like it here, get out. Um, and I think that times have changed, and a lot of I personally think that a lot of the strategies we use in Ukeru around comfort versus control,
Hmm.
trauma informed, this whole idea of kindness, it needs to be overlaid for our employees too,
Right.
and how we're treating them. And I think that's really hard for people. It's really hard because then you look like you're not a good manager.
Which is, I mean, all this is strange because we've talked about this before. It takes more mental and physical energy to be a hard case
Yeah.
than it does to be kind and helpful,
Right.
right? So it's almost like where do a lot of times in training we talk about the why behavior. Why do people do this? Why do people think this way? But where in the world did our society come up with the belief that being hard is the way to go,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And even then, oh, that's how I was raised, that's how I raised my kids or whatever. But it's not the same. It's not the same thing in our settings, the behavioral health, the mental
Right.
health settings, even in, elderly care, things of that nature. There's still people that will use that, same hard stance, even though these are folks who are, well advanced in age, maybe dealing with dementia and things of that nature. And it's just
Right.
strange how prevalent, like, this belief that you can't be soft. If you're kind, you're weak. What do you
Right.
mean kind? They're not kind to me. They spit and they curse and they got to learn. Or
Right.
the thing I heard for years, well, they can't do that in the real world. They got to learn.
Right. And in reality, in my opinion, it takes it takes much more strength, inner strength from a person in a challenging situation, either a challenging situation one-on-one with a client or a challenging situation with an employee. It takes much more inner strength to meet that with kindness. And sometimes I think about the other thing we talk about a lot in Ukeru is the building of relationships and this whole idea of building relationships with clients, but it's the same with staff. And to me, I I like to look at it as kindness brings people in, and the opposite, being harsh, being tough, being mean, being devaluing, degrading, pushes people away.
Sure.
And again, I think it's with the staff, your employees too. Like, why would someone want to work with you if you're yelling and screaming and cussing and devaluing their opinion? Or why would they want to be with you? And I think
That's
that
a good
it
point.
and then to me, over the years in my experiences, and other places, wherever, with people, when I see someone that sort of meets a tough situation in a tough way, in a mean, not compassionate way, I have to think, what's happening with that person? Like, sort of what's broke inside that they can't sort of embrace fear or a challenge, or that they gotta come back at you. That to me, it's, in my opinion, it really is out of fear. It's out of this feeling that they're losing control, when in reality, when they come back so tough, they've really lost control.
Hmm.
Because probably the worst thing is they've lost respect. And
Well, I think, something interesting, thinking about the things you just said. You talk about how it takes more strength to basically be able to control yourself, right? But so much focuses on we got to keep these folks under control or things are going to be get unsafe and all this. But you can't, you don't have control, right?
You don't.
They obviously have had trouble controlling, their own self, their own behavior, and sometimes that's how they end up, in services. But then also staff. I mean, we can't control anybody.
Right.
But even if you're much larger than someone, right? Because I mean, this could we could go off on a tangent of restraint and all that stuff, but you might be able to physically control someone because you're bigger, stronger, but it's still a lot harder to control your own self, your own impulses.
Right.
And I think about all the training programs that, you know, we've gone through over the years at Grafton and other places, and they all stress building the relationship, right?
Hmm.
Build the relationship, use the relationship. But I think the piece that doesn't get included as much is how do how do you prove that you are who you say you are?
Hmm.
Because you could be nice to anyone, right? When they're being nice to you, that's easy, right?
Right.
That's even biblical, right?
Right.
But but if you can be nice to someone, and even if nice like makes somebody skin crawl when they hear the conversation, you can be respectful and controlled in a situation when things are seemingly out of control.
Right.
And while some people would mistake that for weakness because you're not coming at them, you're actually proving to that person that you are who you said you were when things were going well.
Right.
And I think people, they don't remove themselves enough even before they come to work a lot of times and thinking about that, right?
Hmm.
Because maybe, as I'm trying to think, what makes people want to be so hard with folks in our services, our type of field? And is it that these individuals are really that extreme and you know premeditated and all these things, or is it that when I'm here at work, i'm I'm treating them the same way as if it was some stranger out at the mall that behaved this way towards me? And I think as from the outside we have to figure out the differentiation between that, right? Because it's not the same, right?
Hmm.
We've seen situations in the past where a staff will end up in this big power struggle, and then when a debriefing occurs, the staff say, "Well, I wasn't going to back up because they're not going to punk me."
We
Like,
have to.
what are you talking about? You you're in your 20s and you go home at night. When you clock out, you are free to do anything basically in your life. This is a 13-year-old who's in a 24/7 facility. What do you have to prove to someone, right?
Right.
But
Right.
then, and I was thinking also, listening to some podcast recently, and someone talked about um, that we're kind of caught up in spreading negativity, right? We're spreading negativity, and I think about how the idea of being hard in our approaches, how that gets spread.
Hmm.
And you talk about we need to spread a positive virus, which I 100% agree with. But how do you spread a positive virus when socially conditioned as a society, we love the negative gossip and news about horrible events and all these like this person murdered this person TV shows and
Right.
Lion King or Tiger King or whatever it is.
Tiger King.
Like why are we so addicted to the negative, and how do we combat that?
That's a great question. Because it's negativity, it's drama. Yeah. And so what do they say? They say, if it bleeds, it leads. That's what's, it's sort of, some of it is very um, driven by money, right? That's how you sell newspapers. That's how you sell ads on TV. Um,
Psychotropics.
yeah,
Right.
right. So, I mean, again, I think this may sound, it sounds so corny, but I think it is an uphill battle but it's one that you can't back away from. And because I do
Hmm.
think that there has to be a tipping point, because there is a lot of good out there. There's a lot of good. And I think that, you see little things all the time about people doing acts of kindness. There's websites and Facebook groups of people that are challenging each other to do acts of kindness. And so I think you just got to keep picking away at it. You have to. And all the little things add up. And I think, in a sense, for the greater good of humanity, you can't stop. I think you have to take a very optimistic view that that even one person can have a tiny impact, and you
Hmm.
got to keep plugging away. And I think you got to keep trying to challenge people to be kind.
Yep.
I don't think that we can give up because it's going to be hard. I mean, I think it is really hard, but I think we got to try to help people be optimistic and kind. And when I say that, I think that a lot of people think it's. I've been accused before. I had a supervisor years ago that used to call me Pollyanna. You know, that rose-colored glasses. She would say that to me
Right.
too. Like, Kim, I'm not wearing the rose-colored glasses that you're wearing. And honestly, I'm fine with that. You call me that all day because I'm not gonna stop. And I also think that we talk about this, often people will say it's not realistic. So again, like you said, it's not the real world. And my response would be, well, then let's change the world. Because I just don't think that you can say, um, we're just going to give up. We can't.
Well, and also, if we're completely honest, even if you're in community-based group homes, that's not the real world either.
True.
You know, some people get caught up in, they can't do that in the real world. Well, maybe they're not ready yet.
Right.
And also, this is not the real world. And
Right.
it's our job to figure out how do we prepare them for the quote unquote real world, right?
Absolutely. And again, there's small things that we can do. We can do things while they're at a placement like Grafton, but then we can also do things to prepare at least their little piece of the real world. If it's helping their school, get ready for them to come back to school. If it's helping their family, get ready for them to come back home, or their neighbors, their grandparents, their cousins. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do. Just it takes effort.
And I was kind of thinking you were talking about people posting online, encouraging each other to do random acts of kindness.
Hmm.
We haven't even talked about, and I don't really hear anyone really talk about the impact of social networking on this whole subject,
Hmm.
right? Because that's what gets attention. What gets attention is either something bad or my highlight reel that makes me look like I've got it all together.
Right.
Like I'll post everything that shows, look at all these bad examples of humanity, but look how well I got it together, go
Right.
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 So there's instant access. Anything you want, instant access, right? We have everything so quick. We get so comfortable with things, but we also don't want to look like we struggle at all, which I think does impact the workforce in direct care
Hmm.
because behavioral change is chess, it's not checkers, for one. And two, kindness, to put it bluntly, if you look at social media, kindness isn't sexy, right?
Right. That's true.
Being pointing fingers and rallying against this person or that's what gets you likes and followers and stuff. Talking well about person, you know,
Right.
I think about there's a stand up video I watched years ago. This guy Henry Rollins, and he was talking about this back in like 89 or 90 when this came out, and he said, talk about how society's addicted to this type of stuff. He said if you opening weekend two movies, okay, one has this blockbuster film with all these big name actors, and it's all like happy. It's positive, sunshine, perfect family. They love each other. But then down the street, there's a lesser budget film, but it's called like manic depressive, and I can't say the rest of the name on here, but
Mhm.
he said it could have no name actors, but people would be lined up around the block to see that one.
Right.
And there's a lot of truth to that type of thing. Even though he was
Right.
kind of joking, there's some truth to that.
That's true.
So I just also worry about the impact of social media on the mindsets of folks with, direct care, with their own relationships in life. I mean,
Right. But on the flip side, again, rose-colored glasses, there are lots of good examples of kindness in history.
oh
In
yeah,
history and in today, there's tons. I actually heard this week, I was listening to something, and I actually heard, and I never knew this before, um, so I don't know, maybe we'll fact check it later, but it's what I heard, that Nelson Mandela, for all the years that he was incarcerated, that he was tortured, I heard that at one point they made him dig his own grave. They made him lay down in it, and then a bunch of the guards and stuff urinated on him. And what I heard is that when he was freed, he actually had one of the jailers that he had developed sort of like this relationship with attend his inauguration. One of the people that helped to keep him incarcerated all those years attended his inauguration. And someone asked him, how could you do that? Like, why would you do that? And his response was, because I'm free.
wow.
I mean, so if you think, you talk about like, is that weakness? Heck no. Like, heck no. For someone to have gone through that and to be able to, I guess you could say, like, turn the other cheek, forgive, put that aside, and to invite him as sort of an honored guest to his inauguration, to me, there's that you don't get stronger than that. You don't get stronger than that.
Well, and I think that gets at the heart of an encouraging word for those who want to do the right thing, who want to make the change, who want to treat people with kindness and and being influences. If you think historically, I mean, even just in the U.S. alone, anyone who is really remembered well is someone who did the right thing.
Mhm.
But in all those cases, whether you're looking at civil rights with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.,
Mhm.
whether you're looking at Harriet Tubman, whether you're looking at even outside the US with Gandhi and some of those types of examples, change is not easy.
Right.
But if no one's willing to stand up and do the right thing, then society keeps going the way it's going to go.
Right. It's so very true.
I mean, you've talked many times yourself in uh, presentations and interviews and things about how your mindset was when you first started in direct care
Mhm.
to what it is now. And I can remember myself coming in and the changes I've seen. And I think it's important that even if it's tough, you got to do the right thing,
You have to.
right? And in the end, it's not about me if I'm coming in working with individuals. It's not about what my coworker thinks of me. Because same thing, when I clock out after a shift, my coworker is not there.
Mhm.
They exist when I come back to work, right? So in the end, are you doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do? I think that's important to strive for everyone.
Absolutely. Well said.
All right. Anything else for this one, Kim?
No, I think that's a perfect way to end this.
All right. Well, this has been episode 2 of The Mindset. We will see you next time.